Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We all get in situations where we can't explain.
That's crazy how much strength a human being actually has.
A Kelowna Mountie under investigation as new video surfaces of a violent arrest.
Whoa.
Also,
you got to be careful. If not for yourself, think of others.
remain vigilant. A COVID-19 survivor's warning after 8 weeks in hospital. And
when you have faced racism before in the past, you know what it feels like.
unmasking racism.
She didn't like the look of my face.
Stories of hostility against Asian Canadians during the pandemic.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Anita is off tonight. CBC News has obtained more footage of a violent arrest involving RCMP officers in Kelowna. A Mountie is now under internal investigation. And the person who shot the video says it brings up painful memories from his past. Our Dan Burrett joins us live tonight with more on this. And Dan, we saw a brief video of this arrest last night.
That's right, Mike. And now we have a new video of that same arrest from a different angle. Take a look. This is part of the new video. It runs just under a minute and is the moment our officers are struggling with a suspect. They were called to a parking lot in Kelowna last Saturday for a report of a man allegedly drunk sitting in a car. The force says they arrested him for obstruction, but he resisted. Eventually, you see that third officer arrive, and you can see that officer run up to the man and punch the suspect repeatedly. This video was taken from a nearby restaurant rooftop by Tyson Gillies. He's a former professional baseball player from here in BC. Gillies says he saw some commotion, heard some yelling, and saw two officers struggling with a man for what he says was several minutes. He notes he did not see what led up to the struggle.
The only situation in that kind of caught me off guard was the way that the third officer didn't come in there and really assess the situation. First off, to see hands down, okay, was this guy armed or anything? It was without question, come in swinging, blows to the head and jugular area.
The third officer is now under an internal investigation. As you said, Mike, he's also going to undergo a code of conduct review. Kelowna RCMP says the suspect was taken to hospital for his injuries. He was treated and then released. The criminal case against him is still on.
And Dan, this arrest has conjured up some painful memories for Tyson Gillies?
Yes, Gillies is a former professional ball player from here in BC, as we mentioned. He is biracial, legally deaf, and wears hearing aids. He also reads lips. He was drafted by the Seattle Mariners in 2006 and has played for numerous teams in the minor leagues, independent ball, and the Canadian national team. But witnessing that violent arrest stirred up a painful incident from his past. Gillies says he was arrested when he was 21, playing for the Philadelphia Phillies. He claims he was set up by police for cocaine possession in Florida. Those charges were eventually dropped.
It's something that's, I feel, is a big factor in ruining my baseball career, something I've worked my whole life for. And you asked me why I shot that video. It's because I want justice for everybody. And I wish I had somebody to shoot what happened to me in that situation, because then maybe I would have been able to have some visual proof, and I would still be playing the game I love right now.
Gillies says he is willing to share the video he shot to help the police investigation and the suspect that the Mountie punched. Mike.
Dan Burrett live tonight. Thanks. Well, to the latest COVID-19 numbers in our province now. BC now has 214 active cases of the virus. That is up 7 from yesterday. One more person has died, bringing BC's total to 166. There were also 22 new cases of COVID-19 announced today, the most in a single day since May 8th, just one of them in the Vancouver coastal health region. 32 people are in hospital with the virus, 7 of them in intensive care. BC's number of recovered now stands at 2,243 for a recovery rate of 86%. And while we are seeing positive signs in the fight against COVID-19, the progress isn't even across our province. Justin McElroy's been keeping a close eye on the numbers. So, Justin, what are you seeing?
It's interesting, Mike. You know, we had 22 new cases of COVID-19 across BC today, and 21 of them were in the Fraser Health region. And increasingly, that's where we're seeing the majority of cases in the province. Here's a chart of active cases in BC, confirmed active cases. And you can see a little over 100 in Fraser Health, a little under 100 in Vancouver Coastal Health. But look at those bottom three. The rest of BC outside the Lower Mainland, just one in Vancouver Island, one for Northern BC. And today we actually hit a very big milestone. 0 active cases in interior health. Now, of course, there will be some people who have symptoms but haven't gone in for a test, possibly, but it's an extremely good sign that in a huge area of British Columbia, all of the mainland south of Wilson's Lake, essentially, we have now 0 confirmed active cases.
And Justin, the Premier was asked today about the recovery and the impacts on tourism around the province. So what was the takeaway there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, especially the longer we go with virtually 0 confirmed cases outside the Lower Mainland, you're going to start seeing more of these questions. The BC Liberals have had this as a question for the last couple of days, wondering if the number of restrictions in those parts of BC could be lowered. But John Horgan addressed this again today. He said essentially that it makes sense for one-size-fits-all approach to this. Here's why.
The virus is everywhere in British Columbia. There is not one part of the province that is less susceptible to outbreak if we don't follow the directions that have been laid out by public health officials.
So there you have it. Certainly a call from the opposition party to change things, perhaps. We're seeing in Ontario people saying that there should be a different regional approach given what's happening in Toronto versus the rest of Ontario. But for BC, despite having so few cases outside the Lower Mainland, it's all for one for all in terms of our approach.
Yes, but as the Premier says, the virus doesn't recognize boundaries, so we'll have to go from there. All right, Justin, thanks very much. Justin McElroy reporting tonight. And a Surrey man who spent more than 50 days in hospital fighting COVID-19 and its many complications is finally home tonight. And as Ashley Moliere tells us, he wants people to know how devastating the disease can be.
A warm welcome from family as Atish Ram leaves Royal Columbian Hospital. The 58-year-old spent 8 weeks there fighting coronavirus and pneumonia. A tough fight made more difficult by an underlying heart condition. On day 10, he was told he might not live through the night.
The doctor said, you got a 10% chance, right? And then you call your family to tell them that you're not going to make it. And this is what I need you to do to move on. That's the most difficult thing I ever had to do in my entire life.
That was really tough. I lost it.
He's alive, but the virus has taken a huge toll on his body. Ram says he's lost 30 pounds and still needs oxygen to help him breathe. His mental health suffered as well.
You go through the sense of isolation where you can't interact with anybody. Thank God with social media you can FaceTime, but you don't have physical contact. The only physical contact you have is with people who are wearing masks, and that's it. A few words here and there, and they're gone. That took a toll on me.
All right, it's going in.
Each positive test meant more time in the hospital. His wife says in 34 years of marriage, they've never been apart that long.
He would ask me, what's it like without me? And there's something missing. There's someone missing. And now that he's home, it's like we're family. We're full family again.
Ram's wife and 3 children didn't show any COVID-19 symptoms, but just the fear of contracting it added to their stress.
Every time I'd feel a little tickle in my throat, I'd be, worried, am I getting it?
Ram hopes to return to work as a videographer as soon as he can, but recovery comes first.
I feel like a 95-year-old man. This thing is not just 1 day, 10 days, 58 days. This is going to last 6 months or even more.
And he has a warning for anyone who doesn't take this disease seriously.
You still got to be vigilant and you got to be careful. If not for yourself, think of others, because there are vulnerable people out there.
Ashley Moliere, CBC News, Surrey.
T&T Supermarket is suspending all voluntary temperature checks for its customers. The company says with hot summer weather and lineups outside, it anticipates customers' temperature readings will be inaccurately high. It says that was the case in Toronto when that city had a heat wave recently. Mandatory checks for employees will continue. The changes come into effect next Tuesday. 2 Calgary residents have been killed in their home in India. Family members say the husband and wife were victims of a violent robbery over the weekend. Their deaths are once again raising calls for the federal government to do more for Canadians stuck in India's COVID lockdown. As Belle Puri of CBC's Impact Team reports, in recent weeks, the couple was booked on 2 different flights, but both were canceled.
It was a crime of opportunity that ended with the killing of a Canadian couple on vacation in Punjab.
What we have been told is the person who planned all this was only concerned about getting their money and jewelry.
67-year-old Kripal Minhas and his 65-year-old wife Devinder lived with family in Calgary. They went to India in November and were supposed to come back in April. When India went into a COVID lockdown, all flights out were cancelled.
Very religious, I should say, both of them. And nothing but, taking care of volunteer work or religious work is what they were only doing right now.
ਫਗਵਾੜਾ ਦੀ ਓਂਕਾਰ ਨਗਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਤੋਂ ਆਏ ਪਤੀ ਪਤਨੀ ਦਾ ਰਹੱਸਮਈ ਹਾਲਾਤਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਤਲ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ।
Punjabi media say the bodies were found in the Minhas home in the town of Fagwada. Police have 3 suspects in custody, including one man who worked as a caretaker for the couple.
The Minhas couple had been trying for weeks to come home, but they didn't qualify for the federal government's repatriation flights. That's because they were permanent residents of Canada, and the flights are for Canadian citizens.
Permanent residents can only travel on the flights if they're with an immediate family member who is a citizen.
I felt devastated for the family.
Gina Takar heads a volunteer group that arranged 8 private charters to get Canadians out of India. At the last minute, though, the Indian government pulled its permits for the flights.
These 2 passengers were supposed to come on our private repatriation flights. They were scheduled on our 2nd flight to Vancouver.
Because of bans due to the pandemic, family members can't travel to India for their parents' funerals.
That has been the most tragic thing as well for the family, and there's no closure.
Besides the Minhas killings, Takar says 5 other Canadian seniors have died of natural causes waiting to get out of India.
I just want our government to take this seriously. I want them to stand up and stop treating permanent residences as second-class citizens.
Canada now says 2 flights next week from Delhi will be open to permanent residents. The announcement came within hours of the Minhas killings. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
Hundreds of protesters took over Burrard Street near the Hyatt Hotel in Vancouver this afternoon. Hospitality workers are urging the government for better job security following mass layoffs amid the COVID-19 pandemic. As John Hernandez reports, their calls come at a time when the future of international travel is still very much up in the air.
The steady cacophony of horns and chants drowned out the rest of the noise on Burrard Street, a loud call to arms in a place that's become the preferred battleground for BC's hospitality workers.
We need the job. We need our job to come back.
After years protesting for better working conditions, these employees now face an even bigger challenge, hanging on to their jobs at a time when hotels are empty.
It is nerve-wracking. For me, to stay afloat, I am using my credit card and I'm watching what I spend. I'm actually, trying to do a tight budget.
Nadina Benes is now living off Canada's emergency benefit, a pay cut that means she can't send money back to her family in the Philippines.
I only have enough for myself and my rent. I'm living alone, so yeah, it's very challenging for me and I'm struggling.
90% of hospitality workers are off the job. CERB payments will end next month. For many, anxiety is setting in over what happens next.
By mid-September, many of our members can be replaced, and for non-union workers, they can be replaced tomorrow. And the government asked us to stay home and protected us during this pandemic. What we're asking is for them to ensure that no employer takes advantage of the pandemic and replaces their staff.
Today, BC's Premier acknowledged just how hard things are, but don't expect the province to step in just yet.
We're calling on employers to do the right thing and make sure that they're keeping their workforce intact to the greatest extent possible. We expect that to happen. If we need to take steps using the legislature to protect workers, we'll do that.
There's no timeline on when international travel will open up, leaving many of these workers in a lurch. But local tourism is expected to restart later this month. Some much-needed business that could help stem the tide. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, the search is on for a suspect tonight after West Shore RCMP say a mustardless burger sent a customer into a fury last night at a Wendy's restaurant. The man allegedly got out of his car, shouted at staff while pounding on the drive-through window plexiglass, tearing it off completely, and then throwing it under a parked car after his order came back without the condiment he wanted.
I refuse to believe that this is all over mustard. There's clearly something going on in this person's life that's making them react to this extreme level. But regardless of what's happening in your personal life, that's no way to interact with other members of the public.
Nobody was hurt. Anybody with information is asked to contact RCMP. All right, our first check of the forecast now with Brett Soderholm. And, well, it stayed dry today. Is that what we can expect for the next couple of days at least?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, we're not looking at any significant rain coming our way. I will be honest and transparent with you and say there is a slight chance for an additional shower tomorrow morning. But aside from that, we're going to be relatively dry up until, yes, once again, the weekend when things are going to be changing around just a little bit. But I want to show you right now, in terms of our satellite and radar imagery across much of the lower mainland and the south coast, you're going to see there isn't a lot of rain, but there is definitely a noticeable increase in cloud cover. And you can see that, of course, behind me as I'm standing here, but we're watching these clouds move in, and as a result, temperatures today didn't quite reach that seasonal mark, and we're still sitting at about 15 degrees presently in both West Vancouver and the downtown area. A little warmer out into the Fraser Valley as usual. But as we go through the next couple of hours, I do want to say we could be still seeing a few breaks of sun in the next couple of hours, but by the overnight period, we'll see those clouds return, and tomorrow morning and into the afternoon, as I said, probably a good chance to see some showers, but they're not going to be sticking around for too long. And when I come back, I'm going to have a full and complete provincial forecast for you next.
All right, Brett, thanks very much. We will look forward to that. Well, here's the question. What would you do with $24 million? Well, for the winner of last week's Lotto 649 jackpot, the answer was simple: retire immediately.
Now we're just going to do a lot of golfing.
Yeah.
I love golf.
Nice.
So we're going to continue that. Buy a house, buy a summer place, do some traveling once COVID's over.
Sure. 60-year-old Ron Comiskey was checking his ticket before bed when he found out he was a multimillionaire. But even with his newfound wealth, he says he has no plans to move, preferring to stay in Aldergrove. And a reminder, you can watch this newscast live on CBC Gem. It's a free app, and it's also where you can find other CBC programs. And CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. More officers have now been charged in the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, but those charges haven't quieted the streets of the United States, now in their 9th day of protest. This is a live shot of Seattle tonight, where protesters have once again taken over the streets there. We'll have the very latest coming up. And thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream newscast online tonight. Well, many of Canada's top Olympic and Paralympic athletes can now start heading back to the gym. Some of them spoke to CBC's Greg Ross about readjusting their training regimens to the new set of guidelines.
They're back, sort of.
With that, I'm excited to say that we have a number of our Olympic athletes on today.
The Minister of Tourism, Culture and Sport, Lisa MacLeod, taking part in this Zoom call, letting some of Canada's Olympians and Paralympians know they once again have a place to train.
We're pleased today in the province of Ontario to be the first jurisdiction in our country and one of the few jurisdictions in North America to welcome back our high-performance athletes as they prepare for the road to Tokyo next year.
Athletes can book 1-hour strength and conditioning sessions with the Canadian Institute of Sport Ontario, which operates out of the Toronto Pan Am Centre. Great news for wheelchair basketball player Nikola Gonchin, who admits he has a lot of lost time to make up for.
Man, it's been almost 3 months since I've lifted a weight that's heavier than 40 pounds. So
I cannot wait to get back to training in a world-class environment.
But it's not exactly going to be business as usual.
following all the various protocols here in the gym.
And that may take a little getting used to.
We have developed protocols and strict safety and hygiene standards using the Return to Sport Risk Assessment and Mitigation Tool Checklist.
New guidelines include athletes must stay at least 2 meters apart. Only 6 athletes will be allowed in the facility at one time, and they will only have access to the strength and conditioning area. Locker rooms, change rooms, and shower areas will remain closed.
Training will be a lot smaller than normal, but that's to be expected.
The goal is for them to be able to get back in shape while at the same time staying safe.
We are confident that the modifications that we have made to our training center will allow our high-performance athletes in Ontario to return to train in the safest possible way.
At least 6 more training facilities are expected to open up across the country in the coming weeks, including Milton's Pan Am Velodrome. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
Meanwhile, over in Olympic host nation Japan, wildlife rescuers have had their hands full. Police and firefighters in Tokyo have been trying to capture a wild deer spotted along the banks of a river there. Yesterday did not go well, with the deer making its escape. Today was a different story. As you see there, plenty of nets, plenty of planning, and success. Officials say they are still trying to sort out what to do with the animal. All right, stay with us. We'll be back in just a few moments with more on the impact the police protests are having right across the continent. Seems like Vancouver stores just finished taking off the boards from their windows, but now Nordstrom is putting them back up. Vancouver's Nordstrom is temporarily closing and boarding up as a precaution before this Friday's protest against systemic racism and police brutality. Even though Vancouver's previous protest was peaceful, many stores in the U.S. saw property damage and looting over the last week of demonstrations. Other stores on Robson Street are following suit, including Champs, Foot Locker, and MAC Makeup. All right, take you back to a live shot of Seattle down the I-5 tonight, where another protest is happening. Protests across the U.S. entering their 9th day, and the protests, of course, have turned violent in the past with looting in the downtown core. We certainly saw that last weekend in Seattle. There is a curfew in the city from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., and that is extended right through Saturdays. Other cities in the Seattle area also enacting curfews. Governor Jay Inslee called up the National Guard on Monday. As we said, it's been 9 days since George Floyd died in police custody. Tonight, all 4 officers at the scene have now been charged, with Minnesota prosecutors upgrading the charges against Derek Chauvin, who pressed his knee on Floyd's neck, to second-degree murder. Susan Ormiston brings us the latest reaction from Minneapolis.
An anthem to oppression at the growing shrine to George Floyd the moment they learned all 4 police officers will be charged for murder.
Minneapolis is sending a message to the world that we are done dying. Amen. This is history. All 50 states are now demanding justice in solidarity and unity.
Floyd's smoldering gaze looks out now on the pavement where he died, gasping for air. Derek Chauvin kneeling on his neck. He'll get a more serious second-degree murder charge. 2 other officers who pressed their weight on his legs and back, and a third, all who failed to intervene, will be charged with aiding and abetting murder. Answering loud calls for criminal accountability for each of them.
We absolutely believe that he was tortured in the last 8 minutes
and 46 seconds of his life.
But now, strong emotions must be checked against provable facts, establishing intent and the cause of death.
Trying this case will not be an easy thing. Winning a conviction will be hard.
Especially when prosecuting police.
Those are just piece of paper. This will not disappear unless we change the way we think and how we feel about one another.
But here, spirits have lifted that at least the arrests are a first step towards the justice they seek.
Give everybody a little hope about what the next step could be, and hopefully we can continue to, just keep the pressure on.
While sentiments are strong.
All the world is watching. All the world is watching. All the world is watching.
CBC's Susan Ormiston reporting tonight from Minneapolis. Well, protesters have gathered just steps away from the White House in Washington, D.C. tonight, where cracks are beginning to emerge between the president and his Secretary of Defense. As Paul Hunter tells us, it's all over the president's threat to deploy the U.S. military against its citizens.
Just blocks from the White House again today, fury.
Stop killing black people!
Targeting not just America's deep racial divisions, but as well, specifically, the occupant of the White House just down the street.
Trump don't care about us, period. All he think about is himself. He's been against all of us ever since he's been the president.
People are fed up. We're done. We want to ask this ridiculous administration to speak up and to support black people for what they deserve.
On Capitol Hill, another protest, equally forcefully held in silence. Though the quiet was broken by cheers for support from the other side. First one officer, and then another. And significantly, 2 days after Donald Trump threatened to put down the protests by calling in the American military to target American citizens on American soil, today a stunning rejection from Trump's own Secretary of Defense.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
On Monday night, as CBC News watched, Mark Esper met with some of those who'd been protecting the White House. That visit by Esper came just after he'd been with Trump at that church, where protesters had just been forcibly cleared from the area to make room for the president. Esper today acknowledged it was just a photo op. And as for Trump's threat to soon use U.S. troops, he said they should instead be used to protect the rights of Americans to assemble. And tonight, more support for demonstrators, this time from former President Barack Obama.
I want you to know that you matter. I want you to know that your lives matter.
In a live-streamed discussion on racial injustices, Obama suggested the demonstrations are having an effect, highlighting the country's deep challenges. Recent days have been difficult and scary, he said, but because of those protests,
they've also been an incredible opportunity for people to be awakened to some of these underlying trends. And they offer an opportunity for us to all work together to tackle them, to take them on, to change America.
A report from the CBC's Paul Hunter in Washington, D.C. tonight. And closer to home, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Stockwell Day has resigned from the TELUS Board of Directors and is a strategic advisor to a law firm. And he will no longer be appearing as a commentator on CBC after comments he made yesterday on power and politics.
Should we all be more sensitive about any kind of hurting or insulting people, whether it's racist or not? Should I have gone through school and been mocked because I had glasses and was called Four Eyes, and because of what the occupation my parents chose, should I have been mocked for all that? No, of course not. But are Canadians largely and in majority racist? No, we are not.
That was a portion of the panel he spoke on. In it, Day also responded to the Prime Minister's comments yesterday that people of color face systemic discrimination in Canada. Day said this country does not suffer from systemic racism. He apologized. in a tweet today. Anti-racism protests are spreading around the world in the wake of George Floyd's death. Tens of thousands of people marched through London today to protest against inequality in the U.S. and in the U.K. They converged on both Parliament and number 10 Downing Street, the official residence of the British Prime Minister, where some scuffles broke out. The huge protest started hours earlier in Hyde Park. Similar anti-racism rallies have been held in many countries, including France, Germany, and South Africa. Well, some attacked while walking down the street, others while jogging, others on BC Transit. We've seen a real rise in violent anti-Asian attacks, but the community is facing growing discrimination overall. Coming up, we take a deep dive into the rise of that hostility in Metro Vancouver.
The days when the Prime Minister may have regarded his family as a private matter divorced from politics are clearly over, and it's most extraordinary. Almost overnight, Mrs. Trudeau has changed from a rather retiring, aloof figure into a barnstorming asset to the Trudeau Express. Opposition parties may be aghast at this new phenomena in campaigns, but there's no doubt whatever her vote-getting potential may be, she can draw the crowds. What's more, she's now going far beyond the role of admired bystander. In Vancouver, she launched into this speech of such fulsome praise for her husband that it may become some kind of landmark in national politics.
He's a man who often he's thought of as being very arrogant. Well, in my years of marriage to him, I've never once seen him being arrogant. He's shy and he's modest and he's very, very kind.
Well, after such an endorsement, it's not surprising perhaps the Prime Minister has chosen to make women's rights his first major theme. What is a little surprising for many people, however, is that this very private man and this very private family have taken a public love fest and mutual admiration society to unheard of heights in Canadian politics. Just how far they will go in this path is yet to be seen. Brian Stewart, CBC News, with the Prime Minister in Vancouver.
Both the hippies and the straights in this valley are taking talk of burnings and other forms of violence seriously. Don Sutherland, the man who is spearheading the move to get the hippies out of the valley, already faces 2 assault charges. And those members of the established community who are backing him up feel powerless against what they say are the well-educated hippies who know how to use the law.
It's a case of the hippies coming in here and trying to impose their own cult on the people here. Basically, we feel they come in here, they knew how we lived, they knew how we worked and this sort of thing, and they have made no attempt whatsoever to adjust themselves to our society. They've just made a mockery of our society.
But it's not just one thing. We're talking about nudity. I think that's just indicative of the whole attitude. It's a lack of respect for us as individuals and for our country and our laws.
Nudity? Well, nudity, it's absurd that nudity would become a political issue of national significance, you know, like somebody said over there, and I think it was a child's voice, and I think you should go to him. Look at Michelangelo's paintings.
When I came to Canada, I worked for $1.25 an hour, and there was no burden to anyone. Those people, all they do is ride on our shirt tails, and I'm very sick and tired of it.
Since government grants are at least partially blamed for the problems, one whimsical observer has come up with a solution. Another lip grant to study ways of coexistence between the hippies and the straights. Ab Douglas, CBC News in the Slocan Valley.
Some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
The way that the third officer didn't come in there and really assess the situation. First off, to see hands down, okay, was this guy armed or anything? It was without question, come in swinging, blows to the head and jugular area.
CBC News has obtained more footage of a violent arrest involving RCMP officers in Kelowna. A Mountie is now under internal investigation there. RCMP says a man was uncooperative and struggled with officers as they attempted to arrest him.
You still got to be vigilant and you got to be careful. If not for yourself, think of others, because there are vulnerable people out there.
A warning from a COVID-19 survivor who just spent 8 weeks in Royal Columbian Hospital. 58-year-old Atish Ram wants his case to serve as a reminder that the pandemic isn't over and the virus can still find its way to vulnerable people, causing suffering or death. And BC health officials are confirming another 22 cases of COVID-19 and recorded one more death from the disease as of this afternoon. 166 people have now died. There are now 214 people with active cases of COVID-19. 32 are in hospital, including 7 in intensive care. As many people in Metro Vancouver stand up against anti-Black racism, they are also fighting a rise in anti-Asian racism. There has been a significant increase in the number of violent anti-Asian attacks during the COVID-19 pandemic. But it's not the only way the community is being targeted right now. Arlene Young spoke with Asian Canadians experiencing racism in their daily lives. And a warning, you're going to hear racist and offensive language in this story. CBC News is including it to give the full weight and context to what the victim and others experience.
I'm feeling a little anxious.
Everything about this assault and the behavior of the suspect is despicable.
Worried, concerned, sad, and angry.
So I'm more fearful for people that I love, people who look like me.
I'm also frustrated that people think this way. This is 2020.
And that's when the man eventually took out a chisel out of his bag and smashed through the window.
Those are just some of the most violent acts of hatred targeting people who appear to have yellow skin. The East Asian community is on edge. The Chinese community, my community, is facing growing hostility. Subtle microaggressions, you can call them, are taking place daily. There are small words, actions, sometimes even just a look that stings of discrimination. And they're leaving this place that we all call home, feeling like anything but.
Sometimes it's hard to get up and say, oh gosh, I gotta go out today and I hope nobody looks at me the wrong way, you know? And there are days like that. I recently had an incident at a butcher shop. I was lining up outside wearing a mask, and an older Caucasian lady kind of gave me an up and down and walked away from me. I'm the only Asian person that was in line, and then she came back and was very friendly to the two middle-aged Caucasian gentlemen between us. It was subtle enough, but when you have faced racism before in the past, you know what it feels like, and that definitely felt like a moment of it. It felt like a dagger in my heart at the same time.
Something's going on in our world that is going to make us more vulnerable if we're not careful. And it can happen even in a city like Vancouver.
Joshua Crow was out walking his dog Tutu just about a block away from home in a neighborhood best known for its beaches, shopping, and yoga studios when a couple passed him and made a comment.
It was to the effect of like, I have a better chance of catching the coronavirus walking past this guy. I felt singled out. I felt judged, right? Somehow I'm a danger to the public. It really puts you on edge. It kind of makes you feel like I can't let my guard down, or something could happen. And I'm not particularly scared for myself. I'm a taller Asian guy, but my wife is, you know, a shorter female Asian woman. Like, some of the worst violence that's happened in this province has happened to women.
And then as we get closer, they start like, look at these people with their fucking masks. What's wrong with society? You honk, go back to your country. Honk, you fucking chink, go back to your own fucking country.
The victim of another suspected racist attack in Metro Vancouver says she will not back down.
Victim was just someone who was on the bus trying to stand up, be a good Samaritan for two women who were being berated with racist comments.
That's when the suspect is accused of kicking the Good Samaritan and pulling her hair so hard, part of it was torn from her scalp.
Every incident has a ripple effect. Even if you're not the victim this time, it can leave an impression.
The thought of being like enclosed in a like bus where it's like very close and you can't really get out is pretty frightening, so I've been avoiding it if I can.
I feel like I'm on my toes a lot. Like I walk my dog in the evenings. He is tethered to me, so if I ever have to use both my hands, then I'm ready.
There's like the additional burden, and that if something were to happen to me, if other people around me who are bystanders would come and help me out, or if I'd be left alone.
I'm still a little scared, to be honest. Even driving up here, I could feel my heart was racing and I was looking around me.
Lily and her elderly mother were driving home when a white female pedestrian lashed out.
She got really angry. You could see that suddenly she had clenched her fists and her face was red, and she turned and she started walking towards us. And I was absolutely shocked because we hadn't done anything to her. We hadn't said anything. We didn't honk a horn, nothing. We were waiting to turn right onto Lincoln there. And luckily, her friend saw what was happening and literally pulled her away. The only thing that that woman had seen was our Asian faces. That was the only thing. So that was my only conclusion, was that she didn't like the look of my face or my mother's. This is the only home I've ever known. I wouldn't have thought that there would have been anything that would make me feel like I don't belong here, but that did. And that was a small encounter.
Gladys Lamb's elderly mother loved this park. She had a forestry background and would walk these paths every day.
And she also wanted to contribute, and the only way she knew how to contribute at 80 some odd years old was to pick up garbage as she walked, because she just wanted to make things beautiful.
This bench was a gift from her grandchildren. When she died from cancer in February, it became her memorial site. But in May, someone defaced it.
And I walked up and saw, basically it says F China on the bench in, bright black letters.
What was it like for you to see that in that moment?
I was just speechless. I was hurt. I was disappointed. I was hurt because I think my mom just wanted to make this part beautiful, her picking up garbage, and someone made her bench ugly.
The phrase that I've learned is a perpetual foreigner. That it doesn't actually matter what your real story is. You could have lived here for 4 generations. But nobody knows that because they just looked at what you look like, and if you don't look Canadian, they'll assume you're new to the country or that you are a recent immigrant and treat you accordingly, and that's not fair because Canadians aren't defined by the color of their skin.
The impact of a small encounter isn't always so small. It shakes up your sense of being and belonging, and the hurt can run deep. The fear is more of those microaggressions will escalate to clear assault.
I'm Trixie Ling. I'm a Taiwanese Canadian, and I was walking home on the Great Northern Way when I saw a young white man approach me. He said some racist and sexist comments, and I ignored him, and that's when he spat on my face. At that moment, when it landed on my face and I could feel it, it wasn't even my first thought around COVID, obviously, that's disgusting, but it was more just like the power, like the lack of power it feels when someone spit on your face, the disrespect. I really thought, I'm like, this guy spat on the wrong Asian person. Like, I am going to speak up. I am going to keep him accountable. I feel like silence can be used as a weapon to create more fear, more shame, more apathy. So what we have to counter that is to use our voice and use our story and have the courage to speak out, to listen to other people, to hold a space with other people experiencing racism, and to be able to act together.
So how are you feeling about it? I feel saddened, hurt, heartbroken, but on the other side, I also feel loved by the support I receive.
I just want to go back to feeling like we're all one community, and Vancouver's always been good that way.
I think we're going to come out of this together because we're neighbors, because we are kind of stuck in this, and also because it gives us an opportunity to get to know each other's experiences more and to share our experiences, good and bad.
What gives me cause for hope is the fact that I hear lots of people say, this isn't right. This should not be happening. This is 2020. We shouldn't be thinking this of people.
I'll carry that like concern and worry with me for a longer period. But I hope that one day he'll be gone.
Report from Leanne Young tonight. And it's clear there's a lot more to say on this subject. So on June 17th, join us for a CBC town hall on addressing racism in our society. Unmasking Racism, what are we going to do about it? Will be hosted by Leanne Young and host of the early edition on CBC Radio, Stephen Quinn. We want to hear from you about your experiences with racism and the change you want to see. You can email us right now at cbcnewsvancouver@cbc.ca and tune in 2 weeks from now at 7 p.m. You can watch online on any of our streaming platforms or listen in on CBC Radio 1. Well, they're unique and delicate and rarely seen. Coming up, why BC's sea sponges are facing a new threat. And a live shot at 6:45, Science World, False Creek tonight. Showers held off today on the South Coast. Could it stay dry for the rest of the work week? We'll find out next from Brett.
weather update is brought to you by WorkSafe BC. Visit WorksafeBC.com for workplace health and safety resources, including COVID-19 prevention.
Meteorologist Brett Soderholm joins us now live again with the forecast. Turned into a pretty nice evening. What's in store for us in the days ahead?
Well, I think people are going to be fairly happy with the overall weather conditions here in BC for Thursday and Friday. I'm expecting a decent amount of sunshine to be wrapping up the week, and this weekend is going to be a little unsettled, as I was mentioning. But I do want to start things off today by taking an interesting look at what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is because hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin officially began 2 days ago, but already we're looking at Tropical Storm Cristobal. This would be the third named storm of the year. And that swirling mass of clouds that you're seeing, that's responsible for bringing a lot of heavy rainfall and flooding to parts of Mexico. Now, if that weren't bad enough at this point in time, there is a primary concern with this storm. It is not expected to be dissipating as you would expect as it interacts with the terrain, but instead, this storm is going to be making a beeline for the U.S. Gulf Coast sometime by next week. So the range right now is anywhere between Texas and Florida, and there's a lot of uncertainty here, but it's quite likely that Cristobal is going to be bringing a lot of powerful winds, heavy rain, and strong storm surge as well to the whole Gulf sometime next week. So that's something that I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on as time goes on. Now, weather-wise here in Vancouver, just dealing with the risk for showers first thing tomorrow morning. You can see the Sunshine Coast and western portions of Vancouver Island all into that same boat. And when we go farther inland to the Kootenays and the Okanagan, we're not looking at any significant rain here, but we are dealing with some showers, and the risk is there from Williams Lake up to Prince George for some embedded thunder showers as well as we go throughout the day tomorrow. On the positive note, though, flooding, of course, is subsiding as we speak, and our fire danger rating as well, definitely on the lower side of things. And these cooler temperatures that we are expecting over the next little while are going to help keep that danger rating relatively low, in addition with that rain that I had mentioned. Now, as we look toward the weekend, this is where I'm going to be honest with you. Yesterday, I was a little bit pessimistic, thinking that it was probably going to be more of a rainy weekend, but as of now, the models are still struggling to figure out exactly how it's going to go down. Friday, really good confidence we'll be dealing with a lot of sunshine, but come Saturday, I don't think it's going to be an all-day rain event. Probably just be prepared for a few showers here and there, and that same story is going to be the case on Sunday. So temperatures will be rising all the way till the end of the work week, and you're going to notice on Saturday and Sunday a drop down to below seasonal, and we're just going to be in that unsettled pattern for the days ahead. And that is how the weather is going to be working out from now until the next week.
All right, well, we like it when your models are struggling, especially when it's advantageous to us. So we'll keep a close eye on that. Exactly. Thanks, Brett. Well, they are treasured and rare sea sponges, only found off the coast of BC. New studies suggest these gorgeous glass sponges face a big challenge. Have a look. Still in the water, this wayward humpback whale is in the St. Lawrence River off Montreal. It's going to need to head back out to sea at some point. We'll explain why coming up.
We're all adapting every day on this road back to normal, or whatever the new normal will be. And at CBC Vancouver, we're adapting too. So you won't hear the same story every day.
But we all have to move carefully.
As life changes from day to day and week to week, we'll keep you connected to your community with news and top stories.
Good evening. The images.
Stay safe at home and out there.
Well, last night at this time, we showed you video of a whale in the waters of Montreal, but the Wayward humpback hanging out in the St. Lawrence River will need to head back out to sea at some point. Here's a marine mammal expert to tell us why.
Water can alter the skin health of the animal. We're starting to see some lesions on the back. It's not anything to be too much of a concern right now, but it can develop into infections. So the whale could be in fresh water for weeks, even months before it gets too problematic. We're hoping it's going to be a shorter journey here. Managing such a large animal that is swimming freely, it's quite a challenge. The whale cannot really go further upstream, so we're really hoping the whale turns around. Some techniques have been tried elsewhere in the world where other animals get entrapped into a river or went too far into bays. We can try to scare the whale away with loud noise. We can try to block the road. We can even try to tow the whale, but all of that have lots of risk for the whale and also for the humans that are trying to intervene. So as for now, since the whale is in good shape, making sure people are aware of the presence of the whale to manage the traffic around there, it's the best way to maintain the whale's health and hope for the whale to figure out by itself that it needs to turn around and go back where it belongs.
Hopefully it'll make its way out to sea. Before we go, we're just going to leave you with some live pictures from Seattle tonight. A big protest going on down there again this evening, as these protests are across cities in the United States. Last weekend in Seattle, things turned pretty violent, a lot of looting, as the largely peaceful protests seemed to get hijacked by those who wanted to do things differently and had a different agenda. Anyway, the situation there looks relatively peaceful tonight in Seattle. Dan's here at 11 right after the National. Have a great night.